Secretary, Chairman Berman, Senators, and my fellow House conferees. This conference comes at a critical time in our efforts to prevent Iran from dealing a devastating blow to the security of our nation, our allies, and indeed to the world. Recently, Lieutenant General Burgess, the Director of the Defense Intelligence Agency, and General Cartwright, the Vice Chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, testified that Iran could produce enough weapons-grade fuel for a nuclear weapon within 1 year. But even this alarming scenario may be too optimistic given the Iranian regime's long history of deception. The threat from Iran's rapidly advancing nuclear weapons program is magnified by its missile program and its continuing support for violent extremism. For 16 years, we have allowed the Iranian threat to grow. The Department of State, under successive administrations, has failed to implement the sanctions laws already on the books, laws aimed at compelling the Iranian regime to change course. For close to 2 decades, our allies have engaged the regime in constructive dialogue, increased their investments in Iran, particularly in its energy sector, and provided this rogue nation with the financial and, in some cases, the technological resources that it has needed to engage in activities that threaten global peace and security. So as we consider this legislation, we've got to learn from the many unheeded warnings, the missed opportunities that litter our path to our present situation. 16 years ago, President Clinton highlighted the threat from Iran's nuclear weapons and missile programs when he stated in the 1994 U.S. National Security Strategy that, quote, "Our policy toward Iran is aimed at changing the behavior of the Iranian government in several key areas, including Iran's efforts to obtain weapons of mass destruction and missiles," end quote. 1 year later, in '95, Secretary of State Warren Christopher said it quite clearly, quote, "In terms of its organization, programs, procurement, and covert activities, Iran is pursuing the classical route to nuclear weapons, which has been followed by almost all states that have recently sought a nuclear capability," end quote. And Undersecretary for Political Affairs Peter Tarnoff, testifying before the Senate in October of '95, stated that, quote, "A straight line links Iran's oil income and its ability to sponsor terrorism and build weapons of mass destruction, and any private company that helps Iran expand its oil sector must accept that it is indirectly contributing to this menace," end quote. These statements serve as the justification for the original version of the Iran Sanctions Act, which Congress enacted in 1996. That bill included a national interest waiver to address the very same arguments we are presently hearing from the State Department and the White House. It used the words "should" instead of mandating action through the use of the word "shall." It provided all the flexibility that the executive branch requested. Unfortunately, former Secretary of State Madeleine Albright used that flexibility to exercise a sweeping waiver, turning the act from a powerful tool to deter investment into a paper tiger. Since then, foreign investment has poured into the energy sector of Iran, over $40 billion since 1999, according to the Congressional Research Service, and the regime in Tehran has used it to finance its illicit programs. Then in 2002, Iran's secret nuclear weapons program came to light. The CIA, in a 2002 unclassified report to Congress, referred to Iran's determination to use its, quote, "civilian nuclear energy program to justify its efforts to establish domestically or otherwise acquire assorted nuclear fuel cycle capabilities. Such capabilities, however, are well suited to support fissile material production for a weapons program. We suspect that Tehran is interested in acquiring foreign fissile material and technology for weapons development as part of its overall nuclear weapons program," end quote. But instead of ramping up sanctions on the regime, The U.S. once again waited for Britain, for France, for Germany to waste years on fruitless negotiations with Iran. After a decade and a half, this strategy has only brought us closer to the nightmare of a nuclear-armed Iran. Chairman Berman got it right years ago when speaking on the House floor about the Europeans' plea for negotiations instead of sanctions. Howard said that, quote, "They say our way is best. Our way is constructive dialogue. They have engaged in that constructive dialogue for years and years and years, with nothing to show for it. I suggest that these arguments are all smokescreens for commercial interests which are governing that particular policy," end quote. In 2006, after Iran continued to advance its nuclear weapons program, Congress enacted the Iran Freedom Sanctions Act, which strengthened the provisions of the underlying Iran Sanctions Act. The executive branch did not seize that opportunity to deny the Iranian regime additional foreign investment. Instead, the executive branch again refused to use the tools it had been given and ignored mandatory sanctions on those assisting Iran's proliferation activities. Then, for the last year and a half, as the clock continued to tick and the centrifuges continued to spin, the U.S. has engaged in the same failed dialogue that Chairman Berman so accurately criticized all those years ago. We now face what may well be our last best chance to prevent Iran from obtaining nuclear weapons. This is about vital U.S. security interests, and it is abundantly clear from the last 16 years that giving the executive branch greater time and more flexibility will only increase the danger for all of us. It is time for Congress to fill the vacuum created by the executive branch inaction and enact crippling mandatory sanctions that address the rapidly growing threat posed by Iran. The threat of such sanctions has already stopped a number of companies to announce that they will, partially or totally, stop doing business in or with Iran. Last week, the French company Total stated that it will stop selling gasoline to Iran if the U.S. passed legislation mandating sanctions on such exports. Many others are watching what we do before they make their decisions. Weakness on our part will only give them a green light to continue business as usual. If we are to have a chance at stopping Iran at this late date, we cannot produce a bill that is so full of holes, carve-outs, exemptions, and waivers that no one takes it seriously. To do so would make us complicit in Iran's nuclear weapons pursuit. If we are to stop Iran from acquiring a nuclear weapon, we have no choice but to craft and pass a strong bill. I look forward to working with all of our conferees to accomplish that goal as soon as it is possible and before it is too late. Thank you, Chairman, for that time.